Have you ever wanted to get inside the inner workings of high-profile criminal cases? True Crime and Human Design explores thrilling stories that reevaluate themes through an energetic lens. What new details and pockets of understanding might we see when we apply a human design filter to some of life's darkest corners? I'm your host, Corrine Araujo, and this is True Crime and Human Design. Hello, loves. I am so excited. Today we have a very special guest, and just to mention it, okay, I'm just going to mention it. We are talking about John Wayne Gacy, and there was no one else better to talk about John Wayne Gacy than Holly. Yay. I love that.
Who is better to talk about a manifestor serial killer than a manifestor expert, right? I feel like I've reached some level of cred now in my work.
Seriously, though, John Wayne Gacy is a 4/6 emotional manifestor, and something that I really honor is each energy type's experience. But specifically, since I dove in, I've honored the manifestor. And being a manifesting generator, I think what led me to honoring the manifestor a little bit more was there's no support out there for a manifesting generator with the ways that this energy might show up for me, for us. And then it made me dive down this manifestor spiral of, wait, people just don't understand the manifestor at all. When I was first introduced, it was like the projectors are the up and coming and they'll be more understood. And I was like, but I can't find any information on myself. And then in turn, I can't find information on a manifestor.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And I think even though people have made, in a lot of spaces, have made a really dedicated effort to try to understand the complications and the complexities of both the pure manifestor and the way that the manifesting energy shows up in the manifesting generator, that really the only way for people to understand it fully outside of that intellectual context is to have manifestors and MGs express ourselves. We need to inform, especially for the manifestor, because we're doing that from behind that like really heavy closed off energy. At least the MGs, you've got some of that openness and fluidity going on. So I'm thankful on my hopeful days. I feel like the tide is very slowly turning. And on my not hopeful days, I still feel very like isolated and misunderstood, even in the HD community. But I do think overall we're going in a positive direction, at least with people understanding that, hey, maybe we don't know as much as we need to know about the manifesting energy.
Totally. And I think you've done such a great job of cultivating a space and a platform for this greater understanding to happen in this exploration. I know I have your book, and if
You?
I have your book and I ordered it immediately. And if I'm doing a reading, I make sure to use your book, to go into your book, to really sit with that energy. And I do recommend your book to all because I love manifestors so much. So I actually feel like I draw manifestors in.
That's such a thing. That is such a thing. I think as manifestors, we're so used to actually not being wanted, to not being loved, to not having a space. So when we energetically experience someone who genuinely does want us, they're fascinated by us, we flock to those people. And you'll see people around the world, they're like, I just gather manifestors to me. I'm like, that's because you like them. That's because you actually hold space for them. And we're pretty cluey about who wants us and who doesn't.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So every time I send it to all my friends, anytime my friends are going through something, I have a few friends that are manifestors, and I'm like, I'm obviously going to bring up the fact that you're a manifester and I'm going to dive deeper into that energy. But I'm like, how many times have I told you to get her book? Like, your problems will be solved. You'll feel validated.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll send you a little like sales commission for all of the spruiking.
Just get the book.
I appreciate it. I think we need resources. Like, how else do we see ourselves unless somebody can give us a resource to access that?
Totally. Yay. So I'm actually going to share my screen because I like to have the chart up. There he is. Can you see it?
Oh, hello, Mr. Gacy. I sure can.
Hello, Mr. Gacy. Of course, he's an emotional manifestor, like we mentioned. There were multiple things that I know we're going to touch upon, but right away, I saw that 36-6, this cross in general, and just even the heaviness, the weight over here, the definition and the heaviness over here. But yeah, him being a 4-6. So I actually spoke with John Wayne Gacy's death row attorney. She's Karen Conti. So she gave me some pretty good insight into him. And she said that she had gone into it just being curious and not expecting to like the person on the other side. But he was funny. He was very funny. He did seem to really struggle with one day he might say or admit to doing the murders. And then the next day he wouldn't admit to it. He'd deny it, or he would admit to being homosexual. And then the next day he would say, oh no, and say these awful things about being homosexual, which I don't know. Did you get to dive into him at all, Holly?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So John Wayne Gacy was born March 17th, 1942. The reports are vague. I always felt like something was missing, which actually resulted in me contacting his attorney. She just wrote a book, Killing Time with John Wayne Gacy. And it's not just about him, but about her experience with the system and his energy and what he brings forward and the impact he has and the way that people were condoning her because of what he's done. But she also informed me a little bit more on his history. So he was sexually abused as a child multiple times, and he struggled with his sexuality. He had murdered 33 boys, more or less. And I believe she said the youngest was either 6 or 9 years old. He hid them under his house in his floor space, which I think is super interesting because he has that outer vision. He has his valleys as his environment, and he was a contractor. So I thought that was interesting of the outer vision likes to really deconstruct the thing, and having the valleys. For valleys people, they want to be able to get grounded, to put their ear to the ground and be able to gather the resources, to gather the information. And it's almost like he was subconsciously keeping the information at his bay.
Yeah, I think even when you look down into the motivation and the view, that combination is incredible because he's got a need motivation and a possibility view. So being deeply motivated by what do I need in this moment? What is working for me? What do I need to complete this? But then what's actually possible, like out there on the horizon, what's possible? And as somebody who also has a possibility view as a manifestor, I think that the part of the experience for me is in recognizing that there are 300 possibilities on the horizon at any given time. Like the manifestor energy is so big and it's so explorative. And he even has the right angle cross of Eden, which is about exploration. But it's this process of identifying which possibility that I can see is really going to yield me the result that I want the quickest, because I don't want to wait and I don't want to have to be patient and I don't want to have to be methodical. So I think that just the fact that the vast majority of his victims were buried at his house. And then I think like a couple in the river nearby, and he didn't really stray too far. That speaks to me of that balance of the need and the possibility. Like, what do I need? What's possible? What's the fastest direction forward? I'll just bury them here. I'm done.
So interesting. So interesting. To cap off Gacy, he had an abusive father. He was actually named after this Hollywood star, John Wayne, who back in the 1940s was like the epitome of a masculine man. So John Wayne Gacy came out and he does admit that he's bisexual. At that point, he would be really degrading and derogatory towards being homosexual because look at the times. There was such a lack
Yeah.
of knowing and understanding and just such discrimination against it. Right off the bat, he's born with this really masculine idol's name. Gacy was this really more soft, chubby, into writing, into just more of the feminine, if you want to call it masculine or feminine. So right there, I feel like that is a huge factor into his conditioning, into his upbringing, into him really being a target for his father, who was really abusive. And in addition to the sexual abuse, he experienced physical abuse from his father. And his father would actually take him into the basement and abuse him, which I found interesting with him hiding bodies as well and getting lower. Maybe it has nothing to do with it, but I always look for, okay, where did the punishment happen? And his attorney did reveal to me that's where it would happen. He would take him in the basement. And actually, his dad didn't abuse his two sisters. He had great relationships with his sisters. And he was more or less the target. And he was targeted a lot with really derogatory names regarding homosexuality and attacking him sexually. So we do see this play out, this conflict, this confrontation within himself of being a gay man, identifying as a gay man, and being okay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to see how many of these patterns play out really quite universally amongst the manifestor energy too, is that it's very common for a manifestor to have a parent that even prior to birth oppresses some sort of expectation on them. That's purely on an unconscious energetic level. But the number of stories, including my own, of manifestors who've had that experience, whose parents brought them into the world, naming them after something, already predetermining who they're going to be, what role they're going to play, how they're going to impact the family. And for a manifestor, that's trauma. That's just straight out of the gate. That's trauma because we come in needing freedom like oxygen. The only way that we can truly be in alignment as manifestors is to have freedom. And when you are born into a predetermined system that says, this is who you are going to be, and you will perform this way, otherwise we will punish you, the freedom is gone. There's a lack of safety, and that creates a trauma experience for a manifestor. And whether it's linked or not, there's a significant proportion of manifestors who experience abuse, particularly sexual abuse. And I personally think it's the combination of this big, unpredictable, socially threatening manifestor energy. And if you've ever seen even this particular getup, the 4-6 emotional manifestor in a kid, my son is a 4-6 emotional manifestor. It is a beast. It's a beast. They are so influential. They're so powerful. They're so charismatic. They can sway an entire body of people, an entire space. They just take over. And I look at that contextually in the time that he was a child in the 40s and 50s where children were seen and not heard. And he's this big, massive manifestor energy coming through, making waves. Of course, he's going to be abused to suppress that down. But we then also have the combination of being non-sacrals. John in particular has a fully open sacral. And I think that really speaks to why we experience so much of our abuse in the sexual context. Outside of all of the stuff around sexual abuse, right, being very about that submissive and dominant power play and all of the patriarchal social structure and all of those things, just looking at it through the human design lens, he's a 4/6 emotional manifestor with totally open sacral. Like, in some respects, of course he got sexually abused.
Yeah.
Of course he did. And that's an awful thing to say. But it's almost like that's pre-written in the cards. And I know a lot of manifestors can relate to having had exactly the same experience.
Would you mind explaining that a little bit more too? That completely open sacral and that connection that you make?
Yeah, I think we can have an open sacral across any of the non-sacrals. So projectors and reflectors obviously can have the open sacral too. And whenever I see a completely open sacral, it always immediately speaks to me of how fluid that person's sexual expression is going to be, because there's no anchoring in it. There's no, even I have an undefined sacral, and even I feel like I have a very fluid sexual expression, but I have some anchor point to grab onto that say, oh, okay, I think this is what expresses me in terms of my sexual identity. But it's such a sponge. It's such a, I take in whatever the sexual expression of the people around me is. What do they demand that I be? What is normal? What is expected? What is acceptable? What do I need to keep up with here? But there's always that undertone, I think, for every non-sacral of, but is that actually me? If I'm with this partner, maybe I'm a heterosexual with this partner, but maybe with this other partner, I'm a bisexual. Maybe with this other partner, I'm homosexual. Maybe I'm none of those things. I can't ground into it. And when we have a social structure that, particularly for men, and particularly through that era of the 40s to like the late 60s, where it was not okay for men to be anything other than straight. Like, that is it. That's the expression of a male. And anything else is seen as something absolutely abhorrent. He had no ability to express that in any safe manner at all. So it's like this level of oppression that comes from just having an open sacral and not really knowing who you are. And you just got to play. You've got to experiment. You've got to figure it out. And I think it constantly changes. And then he's in this social structure that says, no, you're a man. You can't do that. That's not okay. That's something that you should be ashamed of. And then he's a manifestor on top of that as well, that has an energy that can't be suppressed. It can't be pushed inwards. The only way to really destroy a manifestor energy is to forcibly push it into submission, which is through some form of abuse.
And then you add the nuances. He has that 35-36, that channel. Instantly, whenever I see that with a manifestor, I'm like, I'm going to strap right in. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Oh, are you sure you're ready? But he has that. And then the 36 is his conscious sun, and he is a 4/6. My wife's a 4/6 generator, and coming to understand the 4/6 is just every day I have to be so intentional. I'm a 6/2 emotional man, Jen, and just being really intentional about her process. I'm really aware around her process is so important. And I just emphasize that so much for the 4/6 because truly they do look up to role models. They look up to the people that should be those role model figures to gain this greater self-awareness about who they are. And yeah, I just see that so much in her. So whenever I see a 4/6, especially in regards to a high profile case like Gacy, I know somewhere along the line, he did not have role models that were teaching him in a healthy way, that his role models were also very abusive towards him. And even just the 4/6 makes so much sense to me, along with all of those nuances, just from what their process looks like and what they need.
Yeah. I think that just on the 4/6 alone, I think that worked for him and against him, because the 4-6 we're so enigmatic. We're so good at working people.
Are you a
We
4-6?
can get you to do. I am a 4-6.
Oh,
Yeah, we can get people to do really whatever we want them to do. And I see that so much in John's story, that he would entice his victims to come back to his house, entice them to put handcuffs on under the guise of, oh, I'm going to show you a magic trick because I'm this clown. And actually, the whole while, he's intending to murder them. That's such a 4-6 thing to be able to do. With great power comes great responsibility, I think, with the 4-6, that we really have to be mindful of the way that we are able to get people to move with our energy. But then on the other side of that, the 4-6 also has this experience of pedestaling and crucifixion, where exactly as you said that, like, we need role models to teach us how to be in integrity. We need role models in order to see more of ourselves, to have security in the foundation of relationships. And I think that when we have, that's the only way that the 4-6 really emotionally makes it through the experience that we have, where people elevate us, right? This is so clear in the example of Beckham, David Beckham. If anybody hasn't watched that documentary, go and watch that, because it's such a cool, like, expression of the 4-6 energy. This will pedestal you. You are the most aspirational being out there. You can do no wrong. You are marvelous. You are incredible. But then you will show some element of your humanity that we disagree with, and then you are crucified. And we're not actually in control of that rhythm, because the 4-6 is completely interpersonal. So we're always at our growth edge in relationships, and we can't control how people are perceiving us. And I know that for a lot of 4-6s, it's actually quite anxious to be in that place where people are pedestaling us. Because for us, we're like, oh no, the crucifixion is coming. Take me off the pedestal. Take me off it. Because I don't want to have that experience where then I am cut off, then I am abandoned, then I am rejected. And there's such an interplay between that process that is always moving out as a 4-6 and not really knowing how to be secure in relationships because you weren't taught how to do it, especially as a child. Yeah. That's taken me decades to learn through as a 4-6, how to just maneuver that experience of people love me and then they hate me. And then they love me again and then they hate me.
Yeah. It's so significant and so extreme. So with Gacy, what really sucked me in, I knew I was going to do him, but I was reading through different reports, and of course, I went back to find it and I couldn't find it. But a psychiatrist more or less said something along the lines of, we will never come to understand the anger that is John Wayne Gacy. And I was like, oh, manifestor, one, yes, we understand. And then I saw the 4-6 and I was like, oh, it's like when my wife goes into, recently we adopted a new cat and we just went through a huge heartbreak. And so when we were going through the adoption process, I felt her wall going up. And I was just like, she's prepping for rejection. Corinne, just navigate it. But when a 4-6 puts their wall up, let alone like a 4-6 manifestor, when that wall starts to go up to protect you, she's a generator. So she's like open and warm and things, but that wall starts to go up and I can't breathe. I'm like, whoa. For Gacy, one, we won't understand that anger. It's right here in his energy. And it's played out multiple times. Not only is he a manifestor, he has that 4-6, which, like, rejection, getting rejected, is a no.
He's a 4-6 manifestor child that was abused. Yep. He's self-protecting. He's self-protecting. And as a 4-6 manifestor, I promise you that when that wall goes up, because 4-6s are so sensitive, we are so sensitive to who is in our inner circle and whether they are hurting us or whether they are loving us. So when we put that wall up as manifestors, nothing is getting through it. Nothing until we decide to take it down. And the experience behind the wall is all just anger. It's all anger. And I think that it's so easy to assume that such a sign of misalignment. It's really not. It's really not at all. Even I had that experience a couple of weeks ago in a relational environment that just was not safe, where I was being taken advantage of, where people were using me, where it was really manipulative. And I put that wall up and it was all anger. And I promise you, people did not respond particularly well. They didn't like that so much. Because I think in the 4-6 manifesto, when the connection is there and it's intentional, it's really warm and it's really inviting and it's really inclusive and it just feels so lovely to be part of it. And then when it's missing, you notice that it's missing. And when we put that in psychological terms, I think it's very likely that John Wayne Gacy was easily diagnosed as a sociopath. Because how would any practitioner, any therapist be able to see through that thick wall that he had up?
Totally. And I think that was like, so it's so interesting because my wife also goes down the rabbit hole with me with all of this. And it's my profession and it's my specialty. But with Gacy, I have this challenge with him and I know why it exists. And I, even knowing human design now, it's like human design was so helpful in identifying where I am being repelled by his energy, where I'm being pushed away from his energy, where I'm like sitting there. I'm like, Corrine, read the documents, put his face up. Usually that intrigues the hell out of you. Put the face up, put the documents, maybe put a documentary on that you're going to get mad at because they describe him as something and they minimize his trauma. That'll pull me right in. And I met such a block with him, which speaks to his energy, which speaks to his experience too. If I'm feeling that, how was he feeling?
Yeah. Yeah. As a fellow 4-6 manifestor, I even understand for myself that the experience of my aura repelling someone, to me as a 4-6, is heartbreak. That's heartbreak. And I know that there's a nuance to that across the different profiles, right? I know that a lot of 1-3 manifestors, they maybe get annoyed at it or they're mildly upset, but they don't feel it like heartbreak, not the 4-6, even the people who span the personal and the interpersonal, right? So like the 5-1s, the 5-2s, the 6-2s, they don't feel it to the same degree. The 4-6 is the only profile that, because we are so present in our relational connection to other people, that is our stability. That is our foundation. That is our whole source of security. Then we've got a manifestor energy that can strongly push people away based not at all on anything that we do, say, think, feel. We can't manage that. We can certainly actively push people away, and a lot of manifestors do, but there's something so devastating and grief creating about the experience as a 4-6 manifestor, where you really want to connect with someone in the hope that there's going to be security there, and they get repelled before you've even been able to show who you are. And I understand why for many 4-6 manifestors, particularly those ones who don't even have this language to understand themselves and to see themselves, all they would feel is that I don't have a place in the world. I'm not wanted anywhere and I can't trust the world. So what I'll do in return is control it, because I'm not going to go quietly into the good night, right? Maybe like a projector or a reflector would. I'm a manifestor. So I'm going to use the power that I've got and I'll control it in the way that I see fit. Yeah. It's that we're looking at a very similar kind of outworking in people like Hitler, using all of that manifestor influence for horrible evil. But Hitler came from a remarkably similar background to John Gacy. Like, we're talking about a little boy who was a manifestor child who struggled with abuse, struggled with sexual expression, and then became one of the greatest annihilators in history. There's a danger pathway around manifestors with not treating us with the kindness and the sensitivity that a manifestor really requires, right? Because they can do a lot of damage.
Totally. Wow. And I see that. I see the damage in any of my friends that are manifestors too. Not even the nuances. They aren't 4/6s, but even just in relationships when they're not feeling supported while also not given the freedom to go do what they want. It's this super interesting and delicate game they play. And I tend to make humor out of it. And that usually helps because they ultimately it feels like it can feel like such a paradox almost. And I'm sure that's how it feels for manifestors is you want to do your thing, you want to be bold and impactful, but also you want to be supported. Part of doing your thing is having people along your side supporting you, not getting in your way. And I think that really has to be identified because when people do get in a manifestor's way, especially, it could be completely unintentional and it could be in a relationship. It's just this surge and it's almost this rejection again. You are trying to control me. You don't see me. You don't hear me. You don't love me. I want to do my thing. Like, why don't you understand? Why can't you just get it? And I see that so much play out in relationships and with the greater collective too.
Yeah. Yeah. Paradox is the right word. That's definitely what it feels like too for us within our experience is trying to find this almost infinitesimal balance of how do I have freedom to do what's correct for me and to follow the path that constantly changes in terms of what's correct for me, but also to belong and to have people do that with me, but not getting in my way while I do it. Whenever I see any kind of manifestor who is famous for being destructive, for being violent, for being criminal, I have compassion for that. I understand immediately how they got to that position. It's very easy to see because, as we were saying at the beginning of the podcast, even within human design spaces where we have this language and in theory have this understanding, there is still not an understanding about how to work with the manifestor. There's still this narrative that we have in place that, the manifestors are lone wolves and they're rogue, and all you need to do with a manifestor is just get out of their way and let them do their own thing. What bullshit. Manifestors are
Human.
who need a place to belong, right? Like we have the same genetically driven need to survive as part of the collective as everyone else does. And that's curiously shown up so frequently in my work. The fact that we have so many manifestors in our space who are desperate for that place to belong and simply find being part of a community healing. That's it. Think about the baseline of that there are so many people out there with the manifestor energy who are so lacking in a place to belong that just being somewhere where they are not ostracized is healing for them without having to do anything else. And yet, across the human design industry, even I've been criticized for creating a community for manifestors. I've had several people say to me, manifestors don't need community. Manifestors shouldn't have community.
They're people. You're people.
Correct.
We're
Correct.
driven for connection.
Like
biologically.
Why did we not?
Biologically.
We didn't get the human connection lottery, apparently, when we came in. We're robots who just initiate and create all over the place. But when we have the benefit of decades of collective growth, of all of these languages that now give us access to at least intellectual understanding, hopefully integrated and embodied understanding. When we look at historical manifestors like John Wayne Gacy, he had no hope. He had no hope. This was always what he was going to become.
And I just, then it's just written so many times over for him too. I actually had this come through the other day. I was like cleaning, and we get through anger through compassion, through perspective taking. Compassion to ourselves is the key. It's really the key to peace. And it was just like, wait a minute. We get through anger through being compassionate with ourselves. And ultimately, being compassionate with ourselves means you have to develop the ability and the capacity to form different perspectives. And then that's the key to peace. And I was like, Manifestors. I was
Yeah.
like, they have to be compassionate with themselves. But in order to be compassionate, you have to be able to form different perspectives. You have to open yourself to perspective taking, which when you experience trauma, significant trauma of any form, one of the main ways that we see this is an inability to form different perspectives. And it's
Mhm.
because the world just becomes black and white. It's that very rigid, polarized thinking. And it's doing it to protect you, right? It's doing it to protect him. So that in itself, I'm like, he's not able to form these greater perspectives. I'm sure his perspective taking, you hear him talking about being gay and homosexuality, his ability to access perspective taking was significantly impaired, of course, because of systems of power telling him that everything about him, who he loves, what he likes, is wrong.
Mhm.
In addition to being a manifester, you're wrong. So it's like, where is he going to access perspective taking? How is he going to do that? And in turn, how's he going to be compassionate with himself? And then he has the 36 as his conscious son, which compassion is the highest form. But obviously, he's living so well in that shadow of that turbulence. And I
Yeah.
thought it was so interesting, too, that 36 is connected to sexual lust.
Mm.
And the 6 is related to communicating. The shadow is conflict, but it's all related to communication and it's reaching towards his completely open sacral.
Yeah. Yeah. That 36-6 combination is so interesting, pairing it together when it shows up in the lens of sexuality. I have seen this. I've seen this in other people quite frequently, actually. And it is like the 36 conscious sun and the 6 conscious earth is like, oh God,
Hold
that
on.
is
So much. My
like,
childhood
so,
best friend has the 30s as their conscious sun and the 6 as their conscious earth. And I'm like, ah, I love you so much if she listens to this podcast. I love her so much and it makes so much sense. I'm like, my poor angel. Like,
what a life to live. Crisis and friction. Like that is it. That's the methodology through which they move that both expands them and grounds them. That's how they have to move. And when you've got that on a 4-line expression on both, all of that is happening in relationships. I've seen this show up fairly frequently, particularly in gay men. And like that sexual component of the social repression that they feel and the fear that they feel, sorry, socially around expressing themselves as gay men and how they're going to be typecast and whether it's safe and whether they're going to experience connection or belonging in that space. It's this whole other layer to both of those energies because they both do have tones of sexuality. The 6 is on a 659. Like it's almost like purely sexualized energy. It's just the emotional aspect of it. And he doesn't have the balancing counterpart of it. Right. So I think even people who are incredibly self-aware and incredibly embodied, I've seen people with this 36-6 combination who are remarkably embodied human beings, and they struggle with it. They struggle to move through that journey of the inner turmoil, the inner turbulence, attracting that in their outside spaces. How do they move through it? Where does their energy go? We can't expect someone who didn't have access to any of that, both in terms of the time in which he lived, but of course, in terms of the complex trauma that he experienced, he didn't have the neurological ability to do it any differently. And I also have complex PTSD. I have a remarkably similar background, actually, to John Wayne Gacy, in that I had significant sexual abuse and physical abuse as a child. And the battle of recognizing the neural pathways that are formed in my mind, formed in my brain, and the dysregulation of my nervous system that goes with that as part of the complex trauma, like leftovers, means that it is at some point almost entirely impossible to see a different perspective, to experience emotions in a different way. And that is not, I think that we frame that, especially around trauma, we frame that as such an emotional thing. We frame that as though there's a choice in it. It's not, it's physiological. It's your nervous system saying danger, even if there is no danger. And so you are going on that physiological response with your body, and then your brain is kicking in and having those neural pathways that are so well worn because your brain has literally developed around them as a child. It's too much. It's the space of understanding, like, it's too much to expect a person to live differently when that's the experience that they've had and that's the energetic movement that they've naturally got going on. Maybe he has an opportunity to gain some self-reflection, but he's already in his 80s now. So it's unlikely.
He was actually executed on May 10th, 1994. And of course, are you ready for this? It was,
yes,
he was executed through an IV, and somehow, somewhere, some way, they did it wrong. And I'm like, wow, of course the manifestor is experiencing this. Of course, from my understanding, they had to close the curtains down because it stopped. There was a block. It coagulated together, and so they had to start over, and it started new guidelines for execution.
Typical.
And I'm like, God, that makes so much sense.
Oh, his body literally blocked it just to initiate a new way. He also has the 2551 channel of initiation.
And
He's
it's
doing it without even trying.
It's in his conscious mood, what motivates him. And really, when we experience trauma, what motivates you is driven by your trauma. It's that trauma response, right? So, like, that 25 being his trauma response, and like what motivates him and what drives him, the shadow is constriction. It exists where love is absent, and his repressive nature is ignorant and cold. It's right there. It's right there. And then he has the 51 in his unconscious Mars. So it's not even just like he has that 2551 just
Yep.
placed in things, which I think every planet has a significance. But when I look into these types of cases and these situations, or dealing with these really heavy, complex traumas, these are areas I go to. And he has the 51 right there.
Yeah. This is from that gene keys perspective. This is not only his vocation, like, this is his life's work, is to be shocking. So even the way that he created his criminality, even the way that he went about murdering people was shocking. It made a mark. And it's also the place of his core wound. Yeah. That's a beast. That
At a
51 placement
collective
there.
level.
Huge, coupled with the fact that the guy also has a completely open spleen.
Completely,
So
yeah.
is pummeled by fear all the time. Other people's fears, his own fears, the repetitious fear of his own trauma.
It's crazy. It's so
it's all there. You're right. It's all there.
It's true. I think what's so interesting about the 25. So I was actually reading a forensic evaluation, and I had started to watch a documentary on him, of course, because I'm like putting it on the screen, getting my notepad. I'm like, Corinne, gear up. Oh, you're so excited to dive in and explain to people why this happens. Okay. And I'm getting the repel, the rejection from him. So I didn't even get far. But I got to a quote, and I found a forensic evaluation that said the end of this quote. I didn't even put the quote in that they highlighted. what I put in was when I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown. You could be yourself. You could just let yourself act a fool.
Oh,
And
wow.
that 25, it's universal love. It's childlike. It's releasing that discrimination. It's to love without discrimination or fear of what people think. It's to fully be accepted for being you. So, what motivates him, obviously, especially with his trauma, especially with his sexuality, with those times, with the abuse, with his father, with all these dynamics coming into play, he was actually being a clown. He was motivated to do it. He was motivated. People looked at it and they took the quote and they took afterwards, he said, like, you can get away with murder as a clown. And I was like, that's not the reason. Come on,
Mm.
people. That's not it. What's the motivation? The motivation is not, yes, okay, whatever. You can get away with murder, but what is it? There it is. To be a child,
Yeah.
to be loved,
Yeah.
to
He
just,
was trying to get his needs met. Yeah. In any way that was available. Even look at he's got the hanging gate on 8, which you're so familiar with, right? That style that I want to contribute. I want to express myself in this outward, stylish, individual, unique way, but it's pushing towards the one. He wanted the creative self-expression because that also would have connected up all of his circuitry. That's where he's got the split, his throat to the G center. So the G and the ego are talking to each other. The throat and the emotional center are talking to each other. That makes a lot of sense to me why he would push towards something outwardly expressive and kind of like garish and big and bold, like clown makeup, because maybe that felt like he was actually getting that connectivity that he needed. Certainly in the words that he speaks about it, it sounds like it does, or it did, right? I can be myself. I can be anything that I want to be. There's a level of freedom when I ironically mask myself up and cover myself up and look differently. There's a sadness to that. I think there's like a real
wicked.
grief that for him, he had to become something different in order to feel like he could be himself, but also how genius, how smart. Yeah.
And
To use
yeah,
what's available, put on clown makeup, and that gives you access to what you need.
I know. And with him too, I think it's so interesting. I think there are so many sad pieces, especially when had reached out to his lawyer and was able to talk to her. And I felt more of his humanity through her describing his humanity or her recognizing his humanity, which is also so very sad because I consider myself a super compassionate person and pretty empathetic. And I find humanity in a lot of things. And this is so sad that his energy just, you know, because of all the different factors and again, too, just being born with this expectation that he has this wall up and I can't even feel him. Like, I'm a feeler. That's my thing. I have that 59 is in my unconscious earth. Like,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I'm like, come at me, baby. Let's go. Let's break down the walls. And it's so sad. And it's so his sisters, his family was devastated. His sisters were devastated. His sister was unable to grieve because she's a Gacy. So, God forbid she grieves the loss of her brother, which is also terrible. She said that she called him and she said, is this really true? Do they have the wrong Gacy? Just tell me they're lying. Like, they're not, it's not you. And he said, it is me. No, I did do these things. She said, he was so compassionate and so loving. He helped the geriatric community. She gave all these ways of he was just so loving and caring and supportive. Of course, it's his sisters, right? They had that
Mm.
relationship. He was feeling supported. He was feeling seen. He was feeling the love from them. And she couldn't grapple with it. She genuinely was like, yes, I'm hearing that all these bodies are in his house underneath the floorboards. But if he tells me right here, right now, no, they have the wrong person, I would have been like, okay, yeah, no, I agree. Obviously, someone framed
Mm.
you. That's
Mm.
how just completely mind boggled they were by this whole situation. And of course, we can have our bias, but I don't think I've ever heard, especially out of the person's mouth, and his attorney became pretty close with at least one of the sisters. Said they're fabulous. They're wonderful women. And I could feel the sincerity, how genuine. We all have these outlooks and want to perceive our loved ones as not being able to create harm. But I think when it comes to something like this and there is the tangible fact, it's like you do face it. And I see that with people of being able, more or less having to grapple with the fact because they did see it coming. Or, oh,
Mm.
that could have made sense. Oh, this happened and I did see these behaviors and I should have. But with them, it was completely just, and his friends, his loved ones, completely just off the table. They couldn't believe it.
Yeah. I think that speaks in a lot of ways to the uniqueness of the manifestor expression too, is that with a number of factors that John had in his energy, right? With that 4-6 ability, with that defined ego, he was also able to play with the defined G. He has so much definition in his throat. He's got what, like 6 gates going on in his throat that manifestors really, we are able to wield quite an imagery. We really are able to create a different perspective of our energy based on who we're with and what we're doing. And in those spaces where we do feel safe and loved and looked after and nurtured, those people experience a completely different type of manifestor, a completely different type of manifestor to those people. And I see this all the time with manifestors in their relational circles. Like once a manifestor loves someone, once, especially a 4-6, when you are in the inner circle of that manifestor's energy and they know that you are safe and that you are going to look after them, they will love you harder than anybody else can possibly love you. There is this, I will love you with every second and until our very last breath. And that's not even necessarily in any kind of romanticized relationship. That is on every level of relationship with the manifestor. When you're in, you are so in, and they will show you all of the good parts. They'll show you all of those soft things, all the loving, all the nurturing, all the kindness, all the hopefulness, the visions, the creativity, all of these things that we love to speak about the manifestor with. But then in other spaces where a manifestor does not feel loved and safe and looked after, you will get a cold, almost violent manifestor in that space. You will see a manipulative, controlling, very, we're almost spiky in those spaces, right?
Mhm.
I just keep getting that imagery of medieval castles
Uh-huh.
when they put the walls up and then have the big spikes on the walls. That's what that manifestor energy is. I will push you out. I will make sure that you don't get anywhere near me. And I will do what I need to do to make sure that you don't cross that barrier. And that's, this is part of the kind of light and dark of the manifestor. I think that in human design, we speak about the manifestor in a lot of ways incorrectly because we like to speak about the manifestor very positively as though they're super inspirational and all they ever do is they create and they're so great and look at them off, they're doing their own thing that we all benefit from. And we fail to represent the duality, that the only way that a manifestor can live at that level of brightness is that we have equal darkness on the other side. Yeah. We have a huge capacity of power. We create from nothing. We don't need you. We don't need energy.
Crazy.
We don't need an environment. All we need is ourselves. And that's something that every single manifestor, I think, on whatever journey we're taking, we need to traverse that. We need to learn how do we do the dark manifestor And how do we do the light manifestor? And then how do we keep the harmonious balance of both? And for me, like I have a lot of manifestors in my lineage. Oddly, my brother is a manifestor. My father is also a manifestor. And my father has that same kind of, it's like the veil, right? It's this like game of mysticism. Like my father was very physically abusive, incredibly abusive, very violent, definitely that big expression of anger. He would fly off the handle. It was unpredictable. And yet, outside of our family, still to this day, my father is seen as that he's so engaging and warm and lovely and he's charming. And you're right, like my father was kind of ultimate like salesman. People loved him. He was so successful. He was so great to talk to. And so I spent a lot of my childhood and my adolescent years feeling the cognitive dissonance of that. Of I see when we leave the house, this actually is who my father is. And I see why people respond the way that they do. But then inside the walls of our house, that's not the person that I experienced. And that created this experience of also being invalidated in my trauma. Because people would be like, that's not, he doesn't do that.
No way,
He's a
Jose.
wonderful father. Yeah, like he's not that person. No, he really was that person. So I do think like a lot of that is the manifestor. That's the manifestor experience.
Which you have that really, he represents that because he was friends with politicians. He had a social security pin to get through these massive things. It was like this huge problem that was recognized because they were like, how did you let this person get through you? Like, how did you not see this? But he held parties for 400 people. He would barbecue for them. I see that too, like his outward expression. He did this, he did that. And then behind closed doors, he had this other side to him. He had this complete polarity, really. And I love that you mentioned that too, because that's something that I find that people really struggle with, or manifestors really struggle with. I'm one to call out the dark right away because that's me. I'm like, we got to play. We have to play in the dark in order to be able to see in the light. It has to happen. And I do see that with manifestors so much. I actually see them get frustrated with human design and human design language, which I totally understand, and which is why I love your platform too. And I engage with that as much as I do because you bring the reality to the people that need it. And I'm not one, like when I tell people they're a manifestor or we talk about them being a manifestor, it's almost like they're like, great. Oh, great. I'm like, your energy, like on the positive end, here's this energy. And they're like, but I don't see that in me. And I'm like, I know because you're experiencing this. You've been so suppressed. How can you see your fullness? How can you see the boldness? There's just no support with manifestors besides what you've created, really, and like sporadics. But there is really such a gap. Where is that bridge for manifestors to feel okay? Like I told my friend, you spend more time shaming yourself for feeling angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
Which is
happens when
actually
we
the
do that?
pathway to peace. Yeah. That is the transmutation process. And for all of us, the not self theme is that indication that something is out of alignment. Yeah. That like we're in a place internally or externally that is just, it's not quite correct. And it's an indicator to move, to change. But I think uniquely for the manifestor, we actually can't subvert the anger. I think that's what's different about our experience is that it's so extreme. Everything in the manifestor is extreme. Our energy cycles are extreme. Our initiating is extreme. And even our signature theme to not self theme is extreme. Those are two opposite ends of the human experience. Anger, and not just any anger. For anyone who's ever seen a manifestor in anger, it's like rage anger. It is so visceral. It's huge. And then peace. And so for us, there's no like gentle stepping in between. I think that I have the ability to see, like in other energy types, like when the generators and the manifesting generators, so it's a little bit different for you guys because you've got that anger edge. But when the frustration is there, it's like that can be avoided for a little while. That can be played with. It's malleable. You can move with it. When the projectors are bitter, they can almost laugh at themselves. Oh my God, look at me being bitter. Like, there I go again. I just move myself out of a victim mentality. Yeah. It, the manifestor anger, we don't have the ability to get around it. We can't not see it. We can't play with it. It's overtaking. It's completely overwhelming. It consumes everything. It burns everything in its path. And that's precisely what it's meant to do. Because that level of anger, when you walk through it, when you transmute what the anger is telling you into something, needs to drastically shift now. And now it's going now. And we're doing that transmutation process, whether you want to or not. That's what's happening. But on the other side of it, that's where the peace exists because things are now back in their correct place. I think that so many manifestors get themselves into trouble because what we've been taught socially is that, number one, anger is not okay, which I
Anger's
know a
not
lot of
okay.
manifesting. Yeah, I know a lot of MGs experience that too, right? Because that level of anger, oh, they're
Well,
a
and
little uncomfortable.
that's why too, like anger is something I've dealt with. It's something I've personally dealt with, and it's something I work with, right? It's something I understand at a different level. I know it's this visceral response, but yeah, that anger, that's where I tell people like you're spending more time shaming yourself for being angry. And that's just remove that, just feel the anger. But again, it's like this more of this shame. And that's what people mention to me all the time. And I know for me, I dove down the manifestor hole because so much about the generator just didn't sit with me. As a man
Mm,
gen, I was supposed to have this, and I know we have all these nuances, but I found myself just so misunderstood. And like
yeah.
people would be like, you do have the sacral, so you fall under that. And I'm like, no, but I have this impact that that does people are either inspired by my impact or they're intimidated by it. And when they're intimidated by it, I get the really ugly side of people. And
Mm,
I thought to myself as I was going down, I was like, I need to find out why. And it's what led me into the manifestor more. But
mm,
also this anger. I have this surge of anger. And for me, I don't have the full blown thing. Like, I can't even imagine. That's why I
yeah.
have so much compassion and empathy. And I just work to remove the stigma of feeling angry is a bad thing. It's what you're feeling, right? But
Yeah.
can I tell you
Correct.
that just by my little part of me that feels that anger, again, I can't imagine. Like the little part of it's all visceral. It's just like a whoa, and I'm like, who is it based? Like,
I think the most accurate representation has been in Inside Out, anger character in Inside Out, how his whole body shakes and then the flame come out of his head and all the other characters run around and they have to bat him on the head to get flames to go out. I've never seen a better depiction of the manifest anger than that. That is what it like comes up from your toes and takes over your whole body until it is just out. And when we have difficulty with our anger, 99.9% of the time it is because socially we've been taught it's not okay. So we internalize the anger, we create shame frameworks around the anger, and then that big, bold, loud, fierce energy, instead of going outwards like it's meant to and burning everything up, it goes inwards and it traps in, and that turns into resentment in manifestors and in manifesting generators. And that's where we start to get all of these kind of like psychosocial perversions because that is messing you around. really that is just the volume of anger being internalized, and the level at which you resent yourself and you resent the world and you resent everything about your existence. It's so unhealthy. It really is. And also the precursor to why so many manifestors experience inflammatory disorders in their body, why we have so many diseases, because that energy was always meant to go outwards,
Which
always meant to go outwards.
there are reports that he had congenital heart disease and he was diagnosed at a very young age. He also fell and he hit his head twice, had two significant falls, which again adds into that lack of impulse control. There are multiple reasons you see it. He's the 4-6 and emotional. He's got that 36-35, the 25-51. There's so much of this energy just looking to just burn, baby, burn. And he represses it. But then with the injuries that he had at such a young age, on top of the abuse, his lawyer recalled that he definitely developed seizures, or she believed he developed seizures from it. So I'm
Yeah.
like, in addition, so here's, of course, he ended up just going on this complete and total spree because all of that anger was just suppressed in him, eating away at him. And then she explained it was like the curtains went up and it was nighttime. And that's when he would go do his thing. And yeah, that makes total sense because realistically, this is what we see in trauma. When people are shocked that the world is what it is, my response is always, how long can you stuff shit under a rug before it starts to spill out?
Correct. Yeah, it's
The
best to
human
slow down.
body, the collective. So for him, he had a heart condition at a young age.
Mm. That defined ego, oh, the shadow around that. He's also got, even though he has an undefined head, he has every gate defined, double definition on two of them in his head. I only have 2 out of my 3 head gates. And even I feel like that's so much like electricity moving up here. There is so much movement, but nowhere really for it to be processed. I imagine that he was probably really trapped in his head with no way of getting that out. And even just on the anger piece alone, I think for a manifestor, when we get into that healthy space with our anger and we feel the anger, we know that we let it out and within 2 minutes it's done because it's fast and it's vicious and it does what it needs to do. As long as you're not directing it at other people, you're good. We say to our manifestor child, you can't use your anger at people, pets, or property. And
I love
everything
that.
else is fair game. Like you do whatever you want with it. But when we internalize the anger and we push it down and that turns to resentment, it takes forever to process that anger. Even when you then try to externalize it and express it outwardly, it takes months and months to get it out. There's something, it's almost like it twists and distorts in there, it amplifies, it turns into something that it was never meant to be. And that becomes this much bigger journey than to process it. Consider how much anger he had in his body, in his energetic space, with no way to process it. Yeah. It starts to make crimes like this not look so crazy.
No,
they're evil. This is a horribly evil way that he lived his life, and he created so much pain around him. But it also mechanically makes sense.
totally. Totally. And then in addition to that, it's like he created so much harm around him. And also, harm was done to him. That harm that he created, he really just, he is a manifestor. He's going to amplify that harm. And he's got that 36-35. Like they're going to they're going to do the thing. They're going to do it.
Chase the experience always. Yeah.
That 36-35 is actually what led me into connecting psychology with human design fluidly, like making it an organic transition. was that 3635 because it rang so true for so much energy that I've navigated people with and we've shamed people for, and we don't give them proper outlets because of this energy that they have or these needs that they have to seek these different emotional experiences, or they're pulling it into themselves. And so when I stumbled upon the 3536, I was like, it's right there. These poor people. We gotta
Yeah,
find a
I
way.
find that they're often emotional authorities with this channel are often misdiagnosed with bipolar,
And
particularly around this channel.
yep.
I think because it's so potent, because it's so like the mania that like the 35 that is constantly chasing the edge, constantly chasing change with that like insatiable hunger. I gotta go. I gotta do the big thing. I gotta do the risky thing. And then the 35, the 36 has such an element of melancholy to it, to that deep sadness without meaning and without purpose. And constantly then just moving through that, the up and the down and the up and the down. I think it's really common for a lot of emotional authorities to be diagnosed as bipolar. But in particular, that 35-36 channel is really like the top of the line. And it shows where, even as somebody who has such a passion for psychology, I think it's an incredible field of understanding human consciousness. It shows its limitation
Yep.
because we've taken something that is normal and made it abnormal in the terms of psychology. And all that does is say to people, there is something wrong with you. You are broken and you cannot be fixed. When really, that was the greatest source of their power all along.
Which is what I see so much in my cases I've worked in with the kiddos I've worked with. That's what I love about human design and the gene keys is even ways that I might have thought that this was a kiddo's baseline before, but maybe it was my perception of what their baseline should be. Maybe they have an
Mm.
undefined G center. I see that now so much, especially I have a defined G center and I have a defined throat. And it's very defined. It goes sacral, G, throat for me, like
Oh,
right
yeah.
up. And but my wife has that undefined G. I think it's completely open and an undefined throat. And
Wow.
understanding her human design has been so pivotal, I think, for our relationship wasn't on any edge, but I know it's allowed me to be more compassionate and understanding towards her attachment style.
Mm.
And that's what I love about human design. I can understand people and I'm not instantly, they must have had an insecure attach. We've all had insecure attachments at this point. That's the issue. That's what's happening is it's spilling out of us because attachment has been so beaten into us in such a negative way and we've all grown up with it. So it's spilling. But like, why don't I just not assume the attachment and maybe they just like to experience experiences. Maybe they're just more driven. How can we use that energy in a safe outlet?
Mm. Exactly right. As soon as we start putting things on an end-to-end spectrum where there's any kind of binary that doesn't allow for shade, that says you have to fit in this part, you're in or you're out, that's when we run into difficulty in understanding other humans and in giving compassion to ourselves. And I think to an extent, every system that we have, whether it's like psychosocially based or even whether it's esoteric, every system of language that we have for understanding ourselves at some point starts to lean into those binaries. It's this like really curious outworking of human consciousness that we are choosing to place limitations on
Mhm.
ourselves as a collective. Why are we doing that?
Don't
We've
do
got
it.
like illusion of safety and security. Yeah. Human design is the same. Gene keys is the same. It really doesn't matter which system that you use. At some point, you're going to reach some outer edge where it says this is okay, but this is not okay. And I think that's really where we have the opportunity to take ownership over our own journeys and over our own selves to say, how do I have not only more understanding of myself, but how do I have more joy about the multifaceted complexities of who I am, that things even within me seem oppositional. And the joy is in finding where is the harmony in all of that. I think that there's so much richness to be found in using multiple modalities, in using multiple languages and being open-minded about that. Where do they cross over? Where do they disagree? How does that apply to me, but with a very open perspective on how that applies to me? And looking at these externalized figures like John Wayne Gacy or any other criminal person or major person in history or current celebrity or whoever it is, sometimes that helps. Sometimes it helps to externalize it out and see it playing out in somebody else in a very objective way, which is such a total line 6 thing of me to say.
Yep.
Let's look at everything and be like, where's the big picture? But I hope that's how we are moving forward as a human collective, hopefully, because to me, that looks like that's the only pathway for truly living in a deeper experience of love within ourselves and with each other.
Yep. Yep. Everything you said. And it's being client centered, being human centered. It's not just one way. And even like you said, with human design, there's some sort of limitation. And that's part of my work, I know, is trying to bust down that wall for people to see we have defined what's okay and what's not okay. What if we see these non-self themes and just use them as little pointers that like something just doesn't feel right for ourselves? And because we love ourselves, because we want what's best for ourselves, if I'm angry, then I know something's not right. And what can I do? It doesn't mean I'm not okay. And that's something that I'm really, again, hoping to work with the human design and expand on that is even the shadow states. I love diving into the dark.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, this language that we've had around like shadow and conditioning and transference being bad. No, no,
No.
it's fluid. It's all fluid. Like, how do we experience the aligned state if we don't also experience the shadow state?
And that's just a sign. Like, I know if I'm being mediocre and not wearing my bright pink glasses, then I don't feel secure in being myself in that environment. And why do I not feel secure? Is it the people I'm with? Is it the literal physical space? Am I riding an emotional wave because I have the 3955? Is that what's going on for me? And if that's the case, maybe I should go tuck myself into a little creative slow down space to honor my energy. I think it's so important to have these conversations and to talk about such prominent cases, right? It's not to glorify anything they've done, it's to bring humanity back into the picture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's this space that we've been in of demonizing things that we don't understand is old
Mhm.
and it's stagnant. And we have to move away from that. And certainly in the lens of my work, because I focus so much on manifestors, like this is an area of wounding for manifestors because we have historically only been represented by the great evil that manifestors have done. That's how we get taught. That's how we get spoken about. Oh, Hitler and Stalin and Putin, all manifestors. That's what the manifestor does. And then more recently, I think we've veered to this extreme other end where now we're like, oh no, the manifestors are only positive. We've got Frida Kahlo and Maya Angelou and all these people who did like Jane Austen. They did beautiful things in the world. Look at them. When the reality is that the lived experience is a fusion of the two.
Mhm.
And we actually just need to come into acceptance
Mhm.
of that when things are expressed in a wounded way or we're in a shadow experience of it, that's good. There's more depth available there. The key is compassion. How do we have compassion for that? Then we understand it. Then we can do something with it. But if we're constantly trying to pull away from the things that we don't want to see, we'll never evolve. will never grow.
Mhm.
And to me, that's like the center of everything for manifestors, because manifestors go first. So we're always the ones who are moving through this before the rest of the collective is moving through it. And there is such I think, a healthy burden of responsibility on us to get our shit together where that's concerned. We've got to know how to do this because we're the ones who are making that possible for everybody else. And the irony is that we're also doing that at the same time as not really having a place in society and not really being understood and not fully being accepted. So find pockets. We got to find pockets where that's achievable. Otherwise, we'll go crazy.
You'll go crazy. Which I find it interesting you did. I have to point this out that you said that because look at Pluto, 2-4 in that 31, right? The shadow is arrogance, I believe. And yeah,
I
because
think so, yeah.
the shadow for the 7 is division. So yeah, that's arrogance. I remember this because 31's my unconscious and conscious Jupiter, which makes so much sense that I've created this
Ooh.
platform, right? I remember in the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd says no one understands collective suffering like the 31 archetype. And it talks about the arrogance in communication and how prominent communication is and the way that communication plays out. And here we go. Like you said, manifestors are going to pave the way. They're going to do the things. What's going on in that generation? What was John Wayne Gacy really bringing to the forefront? Look at the harm that the language created during the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's the voice of the leader. So it's going to be powerful wherever it shows up, but you put that in a manifestor throat. Come on. You may as well be putting influence on loudspeaker, but it is going to be the influence that is representative of what the collective is needing to move through, what it needs to journey through. Yeah. He did that in his own way.
He did, especially when I look at just the homosexuality and the terminology that went into being gay. He had such battles with it, and he had such battles because of what was going on in the world, because of society. And when he was trying to outwardly express it, he struggled to. Of course he did. Of course he did. He was living in the shadow state. He was battling his own subconscious with it. He was battling whether he was right or wrong. And it was completely arrogant. And it creates division and it creates hierarchies, right? And that's what he was doing. He was creating it, and also he was feeling it from the collective that much more.
I I'm glad it was him and not me, to be really honest.
You're like, thank goodness.
Like, what of my energy, not my responsibility. Yeah, it's a big thing to deal with. And I think that I just think that we need to have more grace with people, give more space to people who have chosen to come in and take on these big energetic expressions, right? Instead of you have to be perfect and you have to consistently show up in one way. That can be expressed in so many different areas with gate definition, with energy type, with everything. But giving people space to experiment and maneuver through that journey of mastery, I think really is what creates different outcomes in how people live.
Totally. Oh, this has been so great. Is there anything else that really you feel like you want to share or highlight or say?
Oh God, like always the open platform from the manifestor, it can go in 50 different directions.
I know.
I feel like we've talked a lot about the specifics of being the manifestor. And I know that there's this confusion or almost this like gray area amongst like manifestors to manifesting generators and like who experiences that manifestor energy and in what way do they experience it. And it's almost created it like an antagonism between the two energy types. And I think that there's a movement now and a necessity for that to change, that there is a shared experience that we both get to have. And there is a unique set of wounding, even to the extent of trauma, that both manifestors and manifesting generators experience, because being the initiator in the world, whether we're initiating from the void, like manifestors are doing, or whether we're initiating in response, like the manifesting generators are doing, being an initiator in the world is a really freaking hard gig.
Totally.
It's tough because the world doesn't know how to take it. They don't know how to love it. They don't know how to hold space for it. And I think that for manifestors and manifesting generators, because it's likely you're going to have that combination somewhere in your life, work hard on that relationship with that person, because there's something really beautiful to be done there. There's something really magical to be done, I think, by bringing these two different flavors of initiation together. That's really where we start to propel stuff into these spaces that we haven't seen before, instead of having this division, right? I experience it this way because I'm a manifestor and you're not the same because you have the sacral, and right? Enough of that. Yeah. That's all I want to say. That's all that wants to come out.
I'm like so happy you said that, because that's, again, since I started diving into human design 3 years ago, I approached that line pretty quick. So more or less the 3 years, I'm like, we need more space for manifestors and manifesting generators to come together, and even for man-gens to be accepted into whatever we are, because we also get clumped under the generator. And that's where I experience so much of, you're not hearing me. And I felt it in the manifestor. Like, I experienced anger way more than I experienced this frustration. I experience these surges, these impulses. I'm bold, and I have all individual circuitry too. Of course, we have all these nuances, but I'm like, I know that manifestor hybrid in me is, again, it's allowed me to see manifestors, I think, in such a different way. And I love them. And I'm like, let's just go into all your bullshit. Let's open the door. I know you're going to feed me it.
Yeah, we'll give it. Yeah, I was at a conference recently, a human design conference, and the manifesting generators kept getting referred to as generators. It was this very more traditional teaching around, oh, there's 4 energy types. And so manifesting generators were often not even referred to as MGs. It was just like, oh, the generators. And I was so heartbroken. I was so sad by the end of the weekend. And I really noticed how the MGs were then gravitating towards the manifestors, who we were also being spoken about with quite a bit of derision. But it really reminded me that there's an ability and a capacity for healing, I think, between our two energy types, in that shared understanding of what it's like to be so powerful and so significant, but also so overlooked at the same time.
Our boldness becomes, and this has always been a thing with me, in addition to all the things, but it emphasizes, I think, that manifestor hybrid, and that impact on my end is, I am literally either the most inspirational person and people are so inspired by me, and I walk into a room and I feel like a breath of fresh air and they're excited and everyone's propelled, or people are intimidated by me. So they're shutting me down. So they're just trying to make me not exist. And that's what it feels like, is my boldness can't exist in this world.
Yeah.
And
resonate.
yeah. Yeah. And of course, like, I knew that was from the manifestor. And I was like, we need this. Like, people need to understand. I need to speak about it all the time. I'm like, so yeah. Like,
Yeah.
We need to understand.
Yeah, we go further together, I think. We go further together than apart.
Totally. I appreciate you so much. This has been so fun. Where can people find you for people that don't know?
Yeah. I facilitate the Manifestor community. So we're largely on Instagram at the Manifestor community, or just our website is the Manifestor community. We keep it real simple.
Love it.
Community. But we have a lot of manifestors, obviously, but we also have a lot of people who come to observe and learn about the manifestor because they have a manifested kid or sister or boss or partner or client or something. And so it is a really beautiful, kind of open, harmonious space of using different language and different perspectives to understand ourselves. We're in the process at the moment of actually re-releasing Informed. So we released Informed, the comprehensive guide to human design manifesto. Such a mouthful. We released that last year in paperback, and this month we're actually bringing it out in audiobook. Super exciting. We've got a journal to go alongside it, the Informed journal, and we're doing a book club. So for those people who are into the book scene, July is a good month. I feel like I've been like back swimming in the waters of Informed over the last 5 or 6 weeks. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the way that impacts the community and what it gives people access to. And it's such a joy. It really is. It's such an incredible, weird, wild, unexpected privilege to be any kind of leader or teacher to so many powerful beings. So for anyone who's listening who is a manifestor, please come along. I promise you'll feel at home. And if you're not a manifestor, you are absolutely welcome to come in as well. Just be nice to us because we're sensitive.
Yeah, seriously, be very nice. And you're going to walk away with so many gems and such a different perspective, too. It's so funny. I'm subscribed to the
Yeah.
Manifestor community. So it'll be like, hey, Manifestor. I'm like, I'm not a Manifestor. I'm just such a fan. And I'm going to read the thing and I'm going to download this and X, Y, and Z because it's amazing.
Thank you for that. I love that. I love that. It's such a fine dance between creating a space where we just speak to manifestors so
Yep.
they feel seen. And so it's always about them. The focus is always on the manifestor, but also continuing to be inclusive of non-manifestors who just want to be around it. So I thank you for informing me of that because I love hearing that's how people receive it. Like, you're welcome to. I can come too. It's still fun.
It's so fun. It's so fun. And I think it's so important for everyone to have their own space where they do feel safe and supported. And if that offends you of receiving an email that says, hey, Manifestor, then you probably shouldn't go over to that community. Like, it's beautiful.
Not the space for you. Probably not the space for you, yeah.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, share the love with your friends, with your neighbors, with your coworkers, with your community, and head on over to my social media or my website. I'll leave the links in my bio and let's just share. This is really about connecting and sharing awareness because that's what intimacy is at its highest level of consciousness. Thank you so much, and we'll chat soon.